Here I am indeed. Steve in Portland, Oregon, brings up something that Kathy said, or a follow-up to it, really. He says, Art, if 9/11 was truly an inside job, real patriots wouldn't leave their country. They'd stay and bring the criminals to justice. Steve, here's what I'd say. If 9/11 was an inside job, it'd be so far gone, baby, that you wouldn't bring anybody to justice, and more than likely you'd end up dead. Now, that said, Kathy brings up a very good point. I'm not afraid to talk about anything. And based on that and her challenge, we'll pick a night and we'll talk about 9/11. Now, I don't need anybody from either side, experts, to be part of that. I'd just kind of like to sample the public opinion out there, and real unscreened open lines are the way to go. Because, you just get an absolutely fair sample that way. So I'll just pick a night, Kathy, if you're listening, and we'll rock and roll with that a bit. All right, listen. Coming up now, this hour, Colm Kelleher. He's a Ph.D., so it's Dr. Kelleher, really. He is a research scientist and author currently in the biotechnology sector. Dr. Kelleher is a biochemist with a 20-year research career in cell and molecular biology. Following his Ph.D. in biochemistry from the University of Dublin, Trinity College in 1983, Dr. Kelleher worked at the Ontario Cancer Institute, the Terry Fox Cancer Research Laboratory, and the National Jewish Center for Immunology and Respiratory Medicine. Before moving to the biotechnology sector as a senior research scientist, Dr. Kelleher worked as project manager and team leader at a private research institute from 1996 through 2004, using forensic science methodology to unravel scientific anomalies. So, in a moment, Colm Kelleher. Also with us this hour is the legendary George Knapp, who's an 8-time Emmy Award-winning journalist whose reporting on Nevada's infamous Area 51 military base was selected by UPI, United Press International, as Best Individual Achievement by a Reporter in 1989. Other awards include the Associated Press's Mark Twain Award for news writing and the Edward R. Murrow Award for investigative reporting. George is an anchor and reporter just over the hill for the CBS affiliate KLAS-TV, and he also writes a weekly column for a Las Vegas newspaper. So, George Knapp and Colm Kelleher, welcome to the program.
Hey, Art, how you doing?
Art? Aha! Both at the same time. George, quickly for you, I billed you as the legendary George Knapp because people have been doing that to me, calling me legendary, and it feels so, I don't know.
It makes me feel old. I think
that's what it does.
I'd rather be nefarious than legendary.
Well, to some, I'm sure you are nefarious. It's great. Boy, how long, George, since we have spoken?
Gosh, a couple of years, 4 or 5 years.
At least. Yes, at least.
Welcome back to this neck of the woods, Art.
It's great to be here. And Colm, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Art. It's good to be with you again.
Okay, so I guess the way it's arranged, you'll be with us for an hour, Colm? Is that correct?
Yes, I've got to go back to work, unfortunately, after the hour.
Okay. All right, well then I'll try and direct a little more toward you than George in the first hour, but both of you are up for this because, I want to go back over the ranch. I spent a day with Bob Bigelow this last week, and boy, what a day it was. I got a tour of the aerospace facility, and Bob talked a little bit in that conversation about the ranch, and I thought that things had calmed down, but according to Bob, it's still going on. True?
Yes, I think that's very true. Not only on the ranch, but in the entire area around the ranch. As I think listeners probably know, that area of northeastern Utah near Vernal and Roosevelt has been a hotbed for pretty well 50 years. And the ranch is right in the middle of that hotbed. So the activity really took off when this family moved on in 1994. And then went through a frenetic series of incidents up till about the year 2000. Then it sort of got quiet. But, yeah, everything we're hearing is exactly the same as what you were told.
George, have you been up there investigating, ever?
Many times. I went 3 times in the past year. The last time I was there was in October. Mostly what's happened is since the book came out, a lot of people have come out of the woodwork with their own stories about things they've seen up in that area. Colum and Bob Bigelow were kind enough to allow me there the first time back in 2002. I'd been pestering them because I was seeing the reports from the ranch,
yes,
although I couldn't tell anybody about it, and it really drove me crazy. And they gave me permission to go ahead and bring a camera to begin work on a documentary, and I've been back, I think, 10 times now. And it's just about as weird as it gets. Each time we've gone back, we've found new witnesses who've added new pieces to the puzzle, but we're no closer to any answers, that's for sure.
Do either one of you have any idea why the ranch, in fact, the area that you describe, is such a hotbed?
I think there's hotspots throughout the world and the United States, and this one just seems to have been going on for decades, if not centuries. Even if you go back into the Native American legends, and the Ute tribe is very prominent and right in that area, you can go back word of mouth 10 to 15 generations, and it's always the same. In fact, I believe there's writings from Father Escalante that document a weird flying object. I think that's going all the way back to the 18th century. So that particular area, for whatever weird reason, has been a hotbed for decades, if not centuries.
All right, I've had, of course, a series of scientists on the program. I had one last night, and I asked her about this sort of thing, and it was her opinion that vibrational frequencies cause the human brain to see and experience the kinds of things that go on in the ranch and, of course, elsewhere in the world, but that it's entirely going to be explicable, and there's nothing weird about it. There are not ghosts. There are not things that move. There are not any of this. It's all, she said, in the human brain, and a specific vibrational frequency that causes people to see and experience these kinds of things. How would you respond to that?
Well, there's physical evidence. There's ample physical evidence at the ranch in particular that NIDS examined over a period of several years. Vibrational frequencies don't carve up cattle. Vibrational frequencies don't dig giant chunks of soil hundreds of pounds out of the ground. They don't leave tracks on the ground. They don't cause odors. That's a nice theory, but it doesn't explain what happened at the ranch. Not even close.
I mean, one of the famous cases on the ranch happened in March of 1997, when we were called up to the ranch to investigate this 84-pound calf that had been found on the property, and we had a veterinarian with us. He went through all of the pathological findings, did a full necropsy on the animal, and the first thing that he found was this sharp instruments had been used on this animal. It was subsequently verified through 2 forensic labs. So, vibrational frequencies, I think, are all very well for the the observer who has nothing except observation. But when you start getting physical evidence, as George has just said, I think that vibrational theory begins to,
vibrate away.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That particular case, Art, was pretty weird. It was one of the most dramatic of all the mutilation cases that NIDS ever investigated. It was 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and the rancher and his wife were out tagging the ears of newborn calves. They were maybe 50 yards from their ranch house. I mean, it's flat ground, if you've ever seen video of what the property looks like. And they tag the ear of this calf. They go another 100 yards or so, and after maybe half an hour, they hear this noise. The dog makes a noise looking back in the direction where this calf had been tagged. They see the mother cow sort of dragging its leg, walking around in a circle, obviously upset. They go running back there, and this calf had been completely stripped of flesh. I mean, all basically that was left was bone and hide in broad daylight, right there in clear sight of where they were. No sound, no tracks, no anything. Very strange.
Mm.
Yeah, very strange indeed. All right, well, it's the Gorman family, right, that's the focus of the book, Skinwalker?
Yes.
That's the name we're using, yes.
Yeah, okay. An obvious question is, with even a fraction of this going on, who in their right minds would stay?
Well, the Gorman family only lasted 18 months on that property. I mean, they purchased the place in 1994. It had been abandoned for many, many years previous to that. They brought their cattle on the property, and then essentially all hell broke loose. Within the space of 15 to 18 months, they lost up to 18 of their herd of 80 animals, and these were not your normal cattle. These were very, very high-end registered animals. So not only did they lose their livelihood, but they were constantly assaulted by these weird phenomena, everything from flying objects to discarnate voices, bizarre animals, poltergeist activity.
Colin,
and then you've got a succession of... sorry?
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I was going to just ask, when did NIDS first learn of what was going on at this ranch?
In May of 1996. I think Tom Gorman had, at that stage, had reached, and the family especially, had reached a stage of crisis where they were basically sleeping on the floor together in this small homestead for protection. And he began to reach out. He started talking to people in the neighborhood. Word began to filter out. Somebody from the press found out. And then Robert Bigelow found out through that. So the first thing that happened was Robert Bigelow flew up to Vernal and interviewed Tom Gorman. And within, I would say, a matter of weeks, it was decided that the Gormans would move off the property. The National Institute for Discovery Science, which was Bob Bigelow's organization that he had formed with mainstream scientists to study these anomalies, were then moved onto the property. So it happened very, very fast, summer to fall of 1996.
Can either one of you, and I know both of you are very close to Bob, can you tell me what motivates Bob, what makes Bob tick? Why, my God, the man is incredible. Not only has he led investigations like this one, but now he's going to space. I mean, this is not your average guy. What motivates Bob?
Well, his family has a history of experiences going way back, and they've always had an interest in what we would call paranormal activity. And I think when Bob got into a position where he had all the resources he would ever need, he decided he was going to put some of those resources into resolving some of these mysteries, and he has. I would wager to say that he's put more financial support into paranormal UFO-type research than any person ever in the history of the world. He's a complicated guy, obviously. One of the criticisms we've had about the book and about what NIDS was doing up at the ranch is that this must be some sort of a plot by Bob Bigelow to drum up support for some UFO paranormal hotel that he's going to build up there. I don't think people have any idea about just how big Bob Bigelow is, right, and how insignificant something like that would be to him. It's ridiculous.
And the other aspect is somebody who in 1999, as he was walking around the ranch, or 1998, began to ruminate on the possibilities of space. And then not only did he create something, but he actually made it happen. How many people do we know that own their own private space station that is currently orbiting planet Earth? And that has gone from dream to reality in only 7 years. He's built an aerospace company from nothing and successfully launched a space station in the space of 7 years. I mean, that's a testimony to his vision and to his ability to make things happen.
And I got a very good look at the second satellite that is about to be launched. So it's going to continue. If anything, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Bob Bigelow is a very, very complicated man, and I don't fully understand what drives him, but thank God he's there.
Absolutely.
All right, well, with regard to the ranch, I know some of the history, but there's an awful lot of new audience out there, and I know they would just love hearing some of the documented on-video things that have occurred on that ranch.
Column?
Well, the real beginning, I think, happened very shortly after we bought the property, as I said, in mid to late '96. The first real burst of activity occurred within about 5 months of that, and I think the most spectacular was the calf incident that George just described, but that was part of a 5 or 6 day continuum of almost continuous happenings. Less than 24 hours after that calf was found mutilated on the property, and as George mentioned, in broad daylight, the dogs were absolutely going crazy the following night when myself and Tom Gorman and another scientist up there decided to investigate. So we hopped into this truck and started going out into the middle of the pasture. First thing that the bouncing headlights caught was this large, dark shape about 100 yards away on the fence line, and then the bouncing headlights picked up this 2 bright yellow orbs that were about 15 to 20 feet off the ground. What looked like a very large animal perched in the tree. All 3 of us saw it, and we could think of nothing else except that calf that had been dismembered essentially about 24 hours previously. So we trucked on to about 40 yards from where the tree line was, and the closer we got, the larger this animal got in the tree. It was just staring back with these large yellow saucer eyes. Nice. Tom Gorman got out of the truck, and he's a trained marksman, grabbed his hunting rifle, and he said, they're not going to get any more of these cattle tonight, was what he said. So he ripped off a shot, and instantly it was like the lights went out. These 2 yellow orbs just disappeared. Tom was, triumphant. He had actually shot the animal. And he claimed that it had actually fallen to the ground. So we instantly got back into the truck and went right over to the fence line where the animal had fallen. This was like 1 a.m. in the morning, basically. We had flashlights, we had video cameras, so we spread out along the fence line to search for this wounded animal. Then Tom found, he started yelling about 20 yards to my left, said that it was a huge animal. I think it was the dark shape that we had seen on approach that was separate from the animal in the tree. Tom let off a couple more shots into the undergrowth. He said that he had pretty well shot at close range this large bear-like creature. Looked more like a large dog, 400 to 500 pounds. So we were crashing through the undergrowth. And remember, this is out in the boonies at 1 a.m. trying to find these wounded animals or dead animals, not knowing when something would leap out of the undergrowth at us.
Yeah.
So, to cut a long story short, there was snow all over the ground. We looked for tracks. We looked for the animals that we were sure had been hit. We found 2 tracks that were reminiscent of large raptor-like claws, very, very large claws, deep in the snow, but nothing else. There was absolutely no hint of blood. There were no hint of dead animals. I mean, that was, for trained mainstream scientists, for having what looked like 400-pound animals to vanish into the ethers, having been shot at very close range by a trained marksman, was kind of our introduction to this whole, what we termed in the book, Hunt for the Skinwalker. It was like chasing these phantoms that 1 minute were causing serious damage, and at the next minute they would just vanish into thin air. And
more like skin strippers, it sounds like. My God, raptors. That calls to mind something truly awful. All right, we're going to break right here. Colum and George, hold tight. We'll be right back. Colum Kelleher, George, the legendary George Knapp, both my guests right now. This is Coast to Coast AM. Indeed, here I am. Colum Kelleher, George Knapp are both here. Colum has the remainder of this hour with us, so we'll kind of bore in on Colum. There was a incident that occurred at the ranch that I'd love to have him repeat because it caught my imagination. It involved somebody at the ranch with night vision seeing something crawl through a hole that suddenly appeared in midair. Perhaps that in a moment. You know, Bob Bigelow is a very complex man, and the American people should understand the magnitude of what he's doing for them. That said, Cullum, there was an incident, wasn't there, in which something was seen to open up. Can you describe that?
Yeah, that I think the incident you're talking about happened in August of '97, and that was really the summer when all hell broke loose on the ranch for NIDS people. It was like every time NIDS people were on the ranch, which was all the time practically, there was stuff happening, and it was about 2 a.m. when we had two observers on this ridge, which overlooked a small pasture, and the pasture had been a sort of an epicenter of all sorts of, strange happenings previously. So, they were staking it out. It was 2 a.m. It was getting late. Nothing had happened. So they were beginning to pack up their equipment when one of them noticed this small, dull yellow light that began to appear on the ground about 200 feet below them, very close to the ground. And as they watched it, they could see, it was strange. It was getting bigger and bigger. It looked like it was just growing, located about 3 feet off the ground. So they thought, well, might as well unpack the equipment again and take a look at this. So one of the things that NIDS had was they had state-of-the-art equipment, including night vision equipment, and then equipment to measure alpha, beta, gamma, you name it, X-ray equipment. So they unpacked the equipment. One guy grabbed the night vision binoculars. The other guy grabbed a camera with infrared film in it. And the guy looking through the night vision equipment could see, he started describing a three-dimensional, rather than a dull yellow light, this actually was a three-dimensional, brightly lit tunnel. And he started describing at the far end of this tunnel that looked like there was movement happening. And the other guy was watching this large, about 4 foot in diameter, dull yellow light. He could not see anything three-dimensional. The guy noticed movement at the end of the tunnel, and then he gradually discerned this shape. It looked like a humanoid shape that was crawling towards him through this tunnel of light that was located about 4 feet off the ground in the middle of nowhere. And this creature became clearer and clearer as it got towards the mouth of the tunnel, and it looked like a human, a large humanoid creature that was entirely black, no features in the face. It was just like a black shadow like face, heavily muscled, and the creature was literally elbowing and maneuvering along this tunnel of light. And finally, it reached the mouth of the tunnel, reached out, struggled onto the ground, stood up, and then vanished into the night. Wow. Now, in the meanwhile, the guy who had the camera was taking these long exposure infrared film shots. But immediately after this creature stood up from the mouth of the tunnel and vanished into the night, the diameter of the light started to shrink. And within a couple of minutes, it had shrunk almost to nothing, and then it was gone. So immediately it was gone. The first thing these guys thought of was, this thing is coming up the ridge right after us. So, they were listening for maybe 15 minutes. They didn't hear anything. So eventually got the equipment and clambered down the 200-foot cliff all the way down to where the incident had happened. And the first thing that was obvious was a very strong smell of sulfur in the air exactly where it had happened. And the other thing was there was no sense of, no tracks, there was nothing except that strong smell. They immediately activated all of this portable instrumentation. They searched for anything that might have been left there in terms of residues. They checked for radiation. There was absolutely nothing visible. So after about an hour of reconnoitering, they went back to the command center, where there were two other of the researchers who had been stationed further down on the ranch who hadn't seen this incident. But this was a classic incident that happened on the Skinwalker Ranch, where once technology that could see into the infrared was utilized, something became very, very clear, because those dull yellow lights were very, very common on the property, and this was really the first time that they had been captured in the infrared. This night vision technology went very, very deep into the infrared, and it was pretty obvious that this activity was not visible to the human eye because the guy with the camera could only see the dull yellow light, whereas the guy with the infrared technology could see an awful lot more. Now, I would think then.
I'm sorry. I would think then that you'd be using an awful lot of infrared from there on out.
Yes, pretty around that same time, a set of surveillance cameras that could see into the infrared were installed on the property on telephone poles, and it was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They were rolling. They were monitoring pretty well everything. There was a lot of incidents that happened that were just outside the range of those cameras. It was extremely frustrating because every time we pointed the cameras in one direction or in multiple directions, stuff would happen off camera. So it was almost like a cat and mouse game.
I seem to recall there was one incident. I believe they had cameras. Finally, I guess in frustration, you had a couple of cameras pointed at each other, each on poles separated by I don't know how much distance, and something was done. I'm recalling a story that Bob relayed to me in one interview about something that was cut, right?
Yes, that's actually you're right. We had a set of cameras, covering the property, but one of those cameras was focused directly on another set of cameras, and
right.
For whatever reason, this happened in July of '98. Those three cameras suddenly lost power, and the whole focus started investigating why. And once we reached the pole and found what had happened, it was pretty obvious that something had, with tremendous force, ripped the wiring out of all of the cameras on that pole. There was duct tape, layers and layers of duct tape that were binding the wiring that went from the ground into the cameras, the video feed and the electric feed. All of that stuff had been ripped off. PVC piping anchoring the wiring to the pole had been forcibly ripped off. So, something was very angry and was very forceful in dismembering those cameras. But we remembered that we had another camera on another pole that was still running that was directly focused on this damage. So obviously we ran back to the command center and played back the videotape. And this happened at about 8:30 at night during the summer, so there was plenty of light left to still see what had dismembered these cameras. We rolled the videotape, and then it went all the way past the 8:30 timestamp where we knew the previous cameras had lost power, and there was absolutely nothing on the videotape. You could see sort of cows in the distance grazing sort of peacefully. You could see the pole, and you could see the cameras, but nothing whatsoever could be seen. Now, obviously, we took the footage back to Las Vegas. We got it digitally enhanced. We got it blown up. We really went the whole route on this, and we got it enhanced to the extent where you could see the tiny lights on the three cameras as they lost power. You could actually see that on the videotape, but
wow.
You could not see anything about what or who had completely destroyed those cameras. I mean, what had happened, it looked like there was a very, very forceful, brute strength operation that had completely destroyed these cameras. And we had caught it on film, but there was nothing on film.
So that's completely impossible.
Well, I mean, we went through all of these gaming exercises about, was there any possibility that somebody in deep camouflage could have crawled along the ground? But I mean, there was sufficient light and there was sufficient granularity on the video, especially when it was blown up, to detect anything close to that telephone pole with the cameras. And we went round the block on this. We replayed it hundreds of times. We analyzed it up the yin-yang, and the bottom line is there was nothing caught on camera. But at the same time, there was this tremendous physical force. It goes back to your your scientists from last night talking about vibrational frequencies. These are physical impacts that leave evidence that have nothing to do with vibrational frequencies.
Yeah. Since we have you for only such a short time, Colm, I'm curious. Since I've been told that there's recent activity, what kind of recent activity at the ranch or the area?
Well, I know that there's a lot of witnesses coming out with strange flying objects, balls of light. One of the classic things about that we're seeing multiple times on the property were these orbs of light, and they may be different colors. We saw bright white ones. The Gorman family used to see blue ones. Red ones caused a lot of damage to cattle. Other eyewitnesses have come forward, especially recently around the property, to also claim that there's flying lights in the area. We don't know why this activity is continuing or what has triggered it again, but we know that there's a strong discouragement from going anywhere near that property. It is under surveillance right as we speak, and so trespassing is absolutely out of the question. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Okay.
Colm, you said started up again, so there was kind of a lull period. When did it begin again?
Well, this is just hearsay because it's been 2 years since I've left, but from the feedback that we've got, it started up less than a year ago. And, it's not only on the ranch, as I said, a lot of the eyewitnesses that have come forward as a result of of reading this book have essentially completely supported all of the activity that on the property, but have extended the radius not only on the ranch to the entire area. So this particular area of northeastern Utah has been a hotspot for so long. We went through all of the aeromagnetic surveys of the area. We were trying to track gravitational anomalies. We did an awful lot of footwork to see if there was anything unique about the area. We couldn't come up with anything.
The only rap that I've ever heard on Bob Bigelow and on NIDS is that it keeps things pretty close to their chest, your chest. I guess you're still involved. You're still there. So, and I guess, George, you've probably heard this from others, other researchers, that they get a little frustrated because NIDS does keep things to themselves until they've got everything investigated and the final reports in. So at the beginning, when you heard about this ranch, George, I know you've got kind of an in, but did you get in right away, or was there a bit of work involved?
Yeah, it took a while for me to convince both Colm and Bob Bigelow to let me on the property, especially with the television camera. And I assured them, look, I'm going to work on this thing, but we'll wait until the time is right to go public with something. Because, frankly, I mean, this is an ongoing scientific investigation. And I know it's frustrating for people outside of NIDS that they don't know what's going on. But, I mean, you don't invite the public in to participate in cancer research or something. Yeah. This entity, this precognitive sentient entity, which is Colonel John Alexander's name for it, it's an interactive process. And people being on the ranch, it affects what goes on there. So having trespassers and things of that sort is not something that NIDS wanted to do. So, yeah, they kept it quiet. In addition, what the heck do you tell the world? I mean, the problem for scientists like Colm and others is that nothing on this ranch and the more than 100 incidents that NIDS investigated is reproducible. Nothing ever happened the same way twice. This thing, this entity, this intelligence was wily and cagey, almost like stalking big game or something. It never did the same thing twice. And it seemed to be able to read people's thoughts. Well, if you're trying to investigate something like that and nothing is reproducible, and you're trying to be a reputable scientific organization that interests mainstream scientists into investigating paranormal type activity, you don't want to come forward with something that's half-baked and say, hey, by the way, we had a giant Sasquatch crawl through a tunnel of light, and what do you think about that?
So at this point, it's a good question, George and Colm. What do you tell the world? What was I haven't read Skinwalker yet. But what essentially did you tell the world about what you conclude is happening there?
Well, we essentially cataloged all of the or many of the phenomena that had happened, and then we went through all of the possible explanations. The usual cast of characters. We investigated the idea of fraud. We went through the idea of dimensional realities. We went through extraterrestrial visitation. We went through hallucinations, this kind of thing. But we deliberately did not draw a conclusion, an absolute firm conclusion from the research, because, as George mentioned, this has been an ongoing project. I left NIDS 2 years ago, but I know that the research is continuing at a different level. But the object is not to draw any specific conclusions, because if we do, I think we can go off on a tangent that could just lead nowhere.
Okay. Did you ever feel that there was a time when you were close to communication with some kind of intelligence or making a breakthrough of some kind that would be documentable and, the smoking gun?
Yes, we really felt during the summer of 1997 that beginning with that calf incident, right through the summer, there was a tremendous amount of activity. We were interacting with something. It was obvious. We had constructed a series of watchtowers that had dogs as biosensors on the ranch. We were getting a tremendous amount of visual sightings, and we were interacting with something that was manifesting in many, many different ways, but we definitely had the sense we were interacting. And we even went to the extent of attempting to be proactive in interacting with whatever was there, leaving messages out, leaving boxes full of bricks and bricks with different symbols on them. And there was many different attempts to communicate, but the communication never happened on our terms. It was always on whatever was on this property. We were never able to catch it unawares, so to speak.
Were you trusted by your neighbors?
It was a very slow process. When we first arrived, we had the reputation as, this was this kind of very wealthy organization of scientific people with probably government connections, this whole thing. So there's a lot of distrust, but I think over time, we visit the neighbors many times. We talk to them. I think over time, we did build trust. And certainly the immediate neighbors around the ranch all reported almost identical phenomena to what the Gorman family had reported on their property. So, the 5 or 6 properties that surrounded the ranch were experiencing exactly the same thing. So that gave us a tremendous amount of credibility.
I guess that
a tremendous amount of credibility.
Yeah, I guess that word has leaked out in some quarters where the ranch is located. But let's make this appeal right now. It's really more than an appeal. You said it an appeal. You said it earlier that trespassers will be prosecuted.
Yes.
So if you know where the ranch is, don't go there. This is serious scientific work, and it's underway. It's still underway right now, right, Colin?
Yes. The ranch is under constant surveillance, and there are people stationed on the property. So it is absolutely not acceptable to trespass on that property.
All right, Colin, the hour's up. That's it. Boy, it went that fast. Colin, thank you for being here. I can't thank you enough for taking the hour and spending it with us.
Well, thank you so much, Art. It's great to connect with you again.
We'll have to have you back for a whole show. I could do a whole show plus with you. All right, we'll do that. Colin, thank you. Good night. And George, you're coming up next.